work on that.
So, as probably a lot of y'all know, we're a completely volunteer donation-run space. Last year we had our 26th anniversary, which is really awesome. We've been able to exist as a community space, a center for organizing and activism, as well as arts and music, and obviously like the library and info shop for that long. So it's with the help of y'all that we're able to do that. And I'm gonna pass around our little box. Literally change in your pocket is what helps us stay open every month. We really thrive on our members' donations. We don't take big corporate donations and stuff like that. So I'm gonna pass this around and give it over to Joe, who I imagine a lot of y'all know. But if you ever have any questions about event booking or like CMC related things, you can always find me. I'm around. Email me. I'll get some contact information if you're interested in that.
Hello everybody, welcome to CMC, welcome to newbies and old bees here. Glad to have this event here. I've known Scott Camil since basically right after I came to town. One of his, you'll hear about trials was going on, and I used to go to court for an interesting thing going on, and really didn't know how much our lives would be entwined over the years since 1976. So really great to have a first-hand history report written down, even if it is in a graphic novel. The words are all there, the words are very important. I highly recommend it. And it's really a good thing to be able to understand what we've been through to understand where we are. And so, without further ado, I'll bring Scott up, and Scott can talk to you, and we're glad you're here. Thank you for your donations in the box, too.
Thank you, Joe.
Yep. Pleasure.
Thank you for being here today. So my name's Scott Camil. I'm president of the Gainesville chapter of Veterans for Peace. I serve on the Swanee St. John's Group Sierra Club Executive Committee, and I'm the political chair. And I'm on the Charter Review Commission for the county. I'm here today to talk about this book, Winter Warrior. People ask me, how come your name's not on the front of that book, if that's your book? So this is the book that I actually approved. I had a contract with the writer, and this is the book that I approved, and it says Warrior for All Seasons, as told by Scott Camil, illustrated by Eve Gilbert. Probably 10 years ago, several people came to me and talked to me about, they wanted to do a book with the words that I had, and a graphic novel. So I agreed to do that. We wrote a contract, and I approved this book. Eve Gilbert, the illustrator, took the book to her publisher. Her publisher changed the cover to look like this, and they decided to take my name off. So my feelings were hurt, but everything inside is my words. I'm happy that my words are in the book, and they didn't change that. I grew up in Hialeah, Florida, and I grew up in a very right-wing household. My stepfather was a police officer, and he was a member of the John Birch Society. And we had an American flag flying from our house, and in his work for the John Birch Society, my stepfather made recordings, and you would dial the word freedom on your telephone, and you would come to those recordings. And those recordings were attacks against Martin Luther King. My stepfather felt that Martin Luther King was a communist and all the communists were bad. So that's the kind of household that I grew up in. I was taught that I was lucky to have been born in the United States, that it was the greatest country in the world, and that all of the other countries in the world wanted to be like us. And all of the other people in the world wanted to be like us. And it was our job to help them defend them against communism and help them to be like us. I was taught that because I was so lucky to have been born in this country, that I owed something back to the country. And what I owed back to the country was military service. At the time that I was growing up, there was a draft. So in my high school, my senior year, all the seniors were taken to the auditorium, the senior males, and the recruiters talked to us. And the recruiters told us that as soon as we graduated high school, we were going to be drafted. But if we signed up now, we could have more benefits. So I thought, oh, more benefits sounds good to me. So I signed up while I was in high school. I joined the Marine Corps in the delayed enlistment program. And 3 days out of high school, I was at Parris Island, South Carolina, where I was trained as a Marine. After my boot camp training, which was an experience that I had never had before, and it was a place, Parris Island is a place where they take the civilian out of the person and they put the Marine into the person. In that training, for instance, when we would go to the training range for bayonet fighting, every time we stuck the dummy, it was kill the gook, kill the gook, kill the gook. We sang songs like, when we were running, cadence songs, I want to go to Vietnam, I want to kill a Viet Cong, with a knife or with a gun, either way will be fun. So I couldn't wait to get to Vietnam. As soon as I finished my boot camp training, I went to my infantry training. As soon as I finished my infantry training, I went to guerrilla warfare school, mountain climbing school, escape and evasion school. And then I was sent to Okinawa, where I went to more of those schools. And then I found myself in Vietnam. And I got to Vietnam in March of 1966. I graduated high school in June of 65. Then I had my training, and by March of 66 I was in Vietnam. And the first thing was I got off this plane at an airport, and it seemed really strange to me because growing up, when I saw people going to war in World War II movies, they parachuted in, the boats hit the beach, and they charged the beach. But I was getting off a plane wearing regular clothes. I didn't have a weapon. It just seemed kind of odd to me that this was how it was going to be. I went into a building. I showed them my orders, and they told me that I'd be spending the night there. And the next morning, a truck would pick me up and take me to my unit. So the next morning, a truck picked me up and took me to my unit, and the unit was called Alpha North. It was Alpha Battery, 1st Battalion, 11th Marines. It was called Alpha North because there was an Alpha Battery 12th Battalion. So when the people call on the radio for support, they had to know which Alpha Battery you were calling to for support, and so there was an Alpha North and an Alpha South. Because I was the new guy in the unit, I got put on guard duty. You had the new people either got mess duty or guard duty. I got guard duty. Our camp had 90 Marines in it. It was an artillery base. We had 6 105 howitzers, and we had a fuel dump and an ammo dump. There were 4 outposts around this base, each outpost had a 50 caliber machine gun, an M60 machine gun, and 2 automatic M14s, boxes of grenades, and claymore mines. Each outpost there were 4 Marines, and 2 Marines would be in the bunker asleep, and 2 Marines would be on top of the bunker awake. We had rules of engagement. and those rules of engagement were that we could not fire without permission. We were not allowed to load our weapons without permission. I've been a person who's, all my life, I've gotten in trouble for not following directions, and I tend to do what I think is the smart thing to do, and a lot of times that's not what you're supposed to do. And so I was thinking, I'm in Vietnam, I'm getting combat paid, I'm going on guard duty, and they don't want me to have a loaded rifle. That didn't sound right to me. So my rifle was loaded. I had my magazine in the rifle, and I had a round in the chamber, and I'm on guard duty, so I'm going to have a loaded rifle. So about 1:30 in the morning, to my left front, a trip flare went off, and there are things that are buried in the ground, and if you hit a wire, they pop up about 8 feet, and they light up, and you can see what's going around, and the trip flare went off, and all of a sudden I saw all of these people with guns. And they were inside the wire. And as soon as the trip flare went off, everything started blowing up, and I just opened fire on the ones that were charging me with their guns. From outside, they hit us with rockets, and of the 4 outposts, they blew up 3 outposts, and they overran those 3 outposts. My outpost was the only one that wasn't overrun, and it was only because there was nothing strategic around my outpost. I wasn't near the ammo dump or the fuel dump or the howitzers. I was in the back near the mess hall, and there was nothing there that the enemy wanted, so there was not a very strong attack against my bunker. The next morning, infantry came to help us, and for the first time I could get out of my bunker and see what was going on, and our camp was pretty much destroyed. The howitzers were destroyed, the ammo dump was destroyed, the fuel dump was destroyed. Out of our 90 men, we had 5 men killed and 28 men wounded. And the enemy left 40 bodies behind. And the next morning, our job was take all the wounded and dead Marines to the front so they could be taken care of. Go around to all the Vietnamese, put a bullet in their head, make sure they're dead, take their weapons, take all of the everything you found in their pockets, all the intelligence information, everything that they had, we brought to the front. After we did that, there were 5 Marines laying next to a bunker with ponchos over them. So when I first got into this unit, people said, "Hey man, where are you from?" And I said, "Oh, I'm from Florida." And they said, "Maine is from Florida." I was from Hialeah, and he was from Jacksonville, so I met him, and he was my first friend. And he also was on guard duty, but he was on a different post than mine. And so when I was pulling the ponchos off of the Marines, I saw him, and I thought, war wasn't going to be as much fun as I expected. I thought that I was in a place where it was people's job to kill me. And they were allowed to do that, and there was no timeout, give me a second chance. And I decided that day that I was going to get the Vietnamese back for what they did to us. And the Vietnamese that attacked us were Viet Cong sappers. Viet Cong were South Vietnamese. Well, the sappers were suicide people. And I thought, I came here to help the South Vietnamese. Look what they did to us. And it made me really hate them. And I decided that day that I would hate all the Vietnamese, that I would get them back for what they did to us. I couldn't tell the difference between the ones that liked us and the ones that didn't like us. So if they were dead, they couldn't hurt us. So I just felt we just kill all the ones that we see, and then we have a better chance of surviving. So I became ruthless. I had no empathy. And I killed as many people as I could. When it was my time to go home, I was raised to believe that a man doesn't leave his friends in a fight. And I felt that it would be cowardice to leave, so I signed up to stay. On my first 13 months, I was wounded for the first time by a bouncing Betty. It's a mine that's planted in the ground. When you trip it, it goes up about 8 feet, it explodes. It took out 7 of us. We were moving on a village. We were doing what's called recon by fire, which means you just shoot while you're walking towards the village and you shoot whatever you see. The lieutenant kicked open a gate, which is something that you wouldn't really do, and the gate was mined, and so it took us out, and normally we would keep 20 to 30 meters between each person because there were a lot of mines. So as you're moving, people are stepping on things and blowing up. And so you stay 20 to 30 meters apart from everybody else, so when they blow up, you don't get hurt, or when you blow up, they don't get hurt. But as we were getting closer to the village, our lines consolidated, and so we were closer together than we should have been, and that's why the mine got 7 of us. At the time, I had, the village was in front of me, and I reached back like this and grabbed my radio operator to pull him up over a dike. And I heard an explosion, and I smelled the explosion, and all of this was this fast. And I thought that somebody had accidentally discharged an M79 grenade launcher behind me, because that's sort of what it sounded like. And then the next thing I noticed, the ground was coming up, and I thought that was strange. Then I woke up. And the first thing I noticed was that my rifle was in the mud. And in the Marine Corps, your rifle would never be dirty, let alone laying in the mud. And it just seemed odd to me that my rifle was in the mud. And I tried to get up, and I felt pain. And then I saw that I was bleeding. At the same time, I heard other people calling for help. My wounds were insignificant. No organs were hit, no bones were broken. I just had pieces of metal that some of them just cut me like this, some of them stuck in me, but nothing significant. When my time to go home was up, I thought, I can't leave. This would be cowardice to leave, so I signed up to stay. So the first time I was wounded was in February of 1967. The second time I was wounded was in October of 1967, and it was on my last operation. And we had gone up to the DMZ. Intelligence said that there was a large cadre of Viet Cong and NVA meeting, and it was our job to go get them. And so we had a helicopter raid. Helicopters make a lot of noise. You can't really sneak up on people with helicopters. And we didn't have enough helicopters to take us all at once. So the helicopters would take a group of us and drop us off, go get another group, drop us off, and do it like that. And they dropped us off on a mountain that was, excuse me, next to the mountain that we were going to. But the Viet Cong could see the helicopters dropping us off and going and dropping more people off. So by the time we climbed down that mountain and went up the other mountain where we were going to fight, they had an ambush set up, and we took heavy casualties. I was wounded from a grenade that was dropped on me from a tree. So we were going up, originally we were in the bush, and then the generals in the helicopters flying over us wanted us to move faster, so they saw a trail, so they moved us onto a trail. And then going up the trail is where the ambush was. The Viet Cong and the NVA had, they were in the trees above us, and they were tied in the trees so they could have both hands free. And they had automatic weapons and grenades. And they had machine guns set up on one ridge line and on the front. And I was hit by a grenade that was dropped from a tree. Again, my wounds were insignificant. No arteries broken, no organs hurt, just pieces of metal. Then it was time, that was the second time I was wounded, and it was my last operation, and it was time for me to go home. And I thought, we're still fighting, I can't leave my friends. So I went to see the first sergeant, told him I wanted to stay again. And I really didn't want to stay, but I didn't have the courage to say that. So my first sergeant said, "You've had enough, you're going home." So I was really happy. When I went home, I still was in the Marines, and the Marine Corps sent me to a bunch of schools, nuclear, biological, chemical warfare school, embarkation school, riot control school, and I went to Europe on a med cruise. And I thought the whole world liked us, and they all wanted to be like us. And every country I went to, they didn't like us. And it wasn't me personally that they didn't like American foreign policy. And so I was really surprised. It was just different than what I believed. I came back from Europe, and while I was in Vietnam, I read an article in the Sea Tiger, which was a newspaper put out by the Navy that we read. And there was an article about Joan Baez and her friends having a concert in San Francisco. And they were collecting blood, and that blood was going to Canada and then going to North Vietnam. And when I read that article, I was really pissed, and I thought, wow, I could get killed by some fucking commie with American blood in them. It made me really hate the anti-war movement. And I hated the anti-war movement as much as I hated the Vietnamese. So then I came home, and I'm at Camp Lejeune, and I'm put on riot control. And I became the non-commissioned officer in charge of the 10th Marine Regiment on riot control. So that's 1,000 guys. And on weekends, we wanted to go home and see our girlfriends. On weekends, sometimes we weren't allowed to go home because we were on standby to go to Washington because of the anti-war demonstrators. So that made me dislike them even more, because they were messing up my relations with my girlfriend. And so we were on standby to go to Washington to this demonstration, and I gave a briefing, and at the briefing to the 1,000 Marines, I said that if one person throws a rock or a bottle or anything at us, I want everybody to empty one magazine into the crowd. A magazine is 20 rounds, so that would have been like a lot of bullets. My commanding officer found out about that, and I was relieved of duty. And I'm really thankful for that. But I really disliked the anti-war people. Then when I got out of the Marine Corps, I didn't really know what I was going to do. My parents were in charge of me, my teachers were in charge of me, then the Marine Corps was in charge of me. I was actually never really in charge of myself. I thought, well, I'll be a cop. Shooting people's fun, I'll be a cop. My stepfather was a police officer and both my brothers were police officers. And so I went down and I applied to be a police officer. I did really good on all the tests, and I got extra points for my 2 Purple Hearts, and then came the lie detector test. My brother said, just be totally honest. Answer all the questions totally honest. So I did. So they said, have you ever murdered anyone? And I said, yes. And they said, where? And I said, in Vietnam. And they said, have you ever murdered anyone in the United States? And I said, no. And they said, oh, that's okay. Have I ever committed arson? Yes. In the United States, no. In Vietnam, we burned villages. So we went down all this list, and all this behavior was okay with them. Then they asked me if I ever used marijuana. And I said, yes. And they asked me, when did I start using marijuana? And I said, in Vietnam. And they asked me if I used marijuana since I came home. And I said, yes. And they asked me if I used it in the last 6 months. And I said, yes. Had I used it in the last month? And I said, yes. Had I used it in the last week? I said, yes. In the last 24 hours? And I said, yes. And then they stopped the interview and they said, we can't hire you because you have no respect for the law. And I thought, wow, of all the things I've done, probably the least harmful thing was smoking marijuana. So now I couldn't be a police officer. So how am I going to live? How am I going to get money? What am I going to do? So I decided I would go to school on the GI Bill because I could get money, and I was getting disability money for my wounds. I didn't really think I was going to like school because I hated high school. It was too much authoritarian stuff for me. But I went to college on the GI Bill, and I ended up liking it, and I was really surprised. I was 4 years older than a lot of the students around me, and a lot of them were at school to avoid the draft. And somebody said to me, well, you don't have to worry about the draft. Why are you here? Well, I'm here to get the GI Bill. In the studies of Vietnam, I didn't like what I was being taught. I didn't feel that they were telling the truth. So I went in to see a professor, and I didn't know it, but when you go to see a professor, they think, wow, he's really interested, and they like you. So I went in to see a professor, and I told him I was a Vietnam vet, and that the books were wrong about Vietnam, and he just smiled at me, and he gave me some more stuff to read. And I read some more stuff, and the stuff was contradictory to my beliefs. At the same time, there were anti-war demonstrations, and I had been reading stuff in the newspaper, and the stuff in the newspaper wasn't telling what I was doing in Vietnam. It wasn't telling the truth, and what I was hearing on the radio wasn't telling the truth. And I started thinking, if what I was doing in Vietnam was proper, why are they lying about it? And I didn't understand that. But I didn't it wasn't enough information for me to take any action on. So I was going to school at Miami-Dade. I graduated with a pre-law degree, and I transferred up to the University of Florida in January of 1971. And I saw in the Alligator that Jane Fonda was coming to speak. So I thought, wow, I'm going to go see Barbarella. So I went to Graham Pond in January of '71 when she came, and she was way down there by the pond on a podium, and I was way up here on the hill, and I could just see little specks down there. And we were playing Frisbee, and we were smoking marijuana and having a good time, and I was kind of listening to what she said, but not really. And then all of a sudden, some of her words captured me. And she said that the government was lying about the war in Vietnam, and it was the duty of patriotic Vietnam veterans to tell the public the truth, and that democracy can't work if the public doesn't have truth about what the government's doing. So I thought, well, I believe in democracy. I think the public has the right to know the truth. I think the government's not been telling the truth. And I'm a patriotic veteran. So I went up and I gave them my name. And a few days later, I got a phone call, and I was asked to go to Detroit, Michigan to testify at the Winter Soldier investigation. And the Winter Soldier investigation was an investigation that lasted for 3 days, and veterans talked about what they did in Vietnam. Veterans from the Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, people talked in their units, there were panels. There was a lot of stuff going on. I still wasn't against the war, but I went there, and I think what's really important about that is that when I was invited to testify at Winter Soldier, all they knew about me was that I was a Marine sergeant who'd been to Vietnam. They didn't have any idea about what I would say, whether I would be for the war, whether I'd be against the war. I was just going to answer whatever questions they asked me. But a lot of people, the right wing, if you will, has tried to discredit the film Winter Soldier and the Winter Soldier investigation. And they've tried to say that Jane Fonda and her friends contrived this, and it's not really honest. And I'm here to say that they invited me to tell my story about what I did in Vietnam without any clue about what that story would be. And so that speaks to the integrity of the investigation. I knew what I had done and seen in Vietnam. That's all I really knew about Vietnam. When I heard other people testifying, people from other branches of the service and from other time periods, I got to see a bigger picture of Vietnam. Then the last day, when all the testimony was over, somebody said, let's have a meeting. So all of the veterans went into a room and discussed the 3 days of testimony we participated in and that we heard, and what are we going to do about that? So we decided at that meeting that we would form Vietnam Veterans Against the War as a national organization. We broke the country down into 28 sections because there were 28 of us. We each took responsibility for a section of the country to organize veterans. So my section was Florida, Alabama, and Georgia. And I thought, well, the best thing to do is have more Winter Soldier investigations. At the same time, Playboy magazine had given us a full-page ad for free. And that resulted in 20,000 Vietnam veterans sending in their names and saying, hey, we want to do something about the war. So all of a sudden, I got a list of all of the veterans from Florida, Alabama, and Georgia. That's before we had computers and we had Xerox machines. So I wrote a letter and I sent each city, I sent all the veterans in that city a letter. And in that letter, I sent them a list of all the other persons in that city that wanted to work against the war. And I asked them to get together, set up a time to have a meeting, and I'll come and I'll help you organize. And so now I was organizing chapters of Vietnam Veterans Against the War in those 3 states. And I thought that our best action would be to have winter soldier investigations so people in each one of those communities could hear from their own citizens about what they did in Vietnam. So I started organizing those things, and I started getting arrested. And in a 6-month period, I was arrested on 18 charges. I was facing death plus 120 years in prison. I was found not guilty on all of those charges. I had 3 trials. I was pro se. I represented myself as co-counsel. One of those trials was the Gainesville 8 trial, where we were charged with conspiracy to disrupt the Republican convention. In that particular case, we had received intelligence information that the U.S. government was going to attack the anti-war people in Miami Beach. And Miami Beach is attached to the mainland by 5 bridges. And our intelligence told us that the government was going to shoot someone at the beach. They were going to blame the demonstrators. They were going to raise those 5 bridges to lock everybody stuck on the beach, and that they were going to wipe out the anti-war people. So I was in charge of security for this action. So we made plans of how are we going to stop this? What are we going to do? So the plans I wrote called for diversionary actions. We don't have enough people to fight the police, so we have to figure out something else. So my plans called for attacking all federal buildings, police stations, and fire stations in Dade County, Florida, and in Broward County, Florida. And the attacks would not be to hurt personnel, but the attacks would be to cause the authorities that were attacking the peaceful people on the beach and cause those police to have to leave the beach and go to their own towns and defend them. And so I wrote those plans. I gave them to my vice president, who turned out to be an FBI agent. And he took them to the FBI building. The FBI Xeroxed the letter. The FBI folded those letters. They stuffed those letters in envelopes. They addressed those envelopes, and they mailed them out to all my people. And so at the Gainesville 8 trial, when we were subpoenaed to go to the grand jury, so the demonstrations for the convention were supposed to start on a Monday. And on Friday and Saturday, the FBI started rounding us up. And we had to go to Tallahassee for the grand jury, and the lawyers argued to the judge that there were 28 of us there, and the grand jury can only see 1 person at a time, so they should stagger our appearances. And there were only 6 lawyers, and they needed to meet with us 1 at a time, and there wasn't enough time to do that. So the judge ruled that we were all part of a group, and the lawyers should meet with us as a group. The lawyers argued that that would be a violation of attorney-client privilege, that the lawyers argued that there might be, some of these people might be undercover agents. So the judge had the prosecutor get on the stand, and the prosecutor swore that none of us were undercover agents. So when we were indicted in the Gainesville 8 case and started forming our defense committee, we picked people who were subpoenaed because we knew they couldn't be undercover agents because the prosecutor swore that they weren't. Well, it turned out that 3 of them were. And one of those 3 helped us select the jury and sat with the defense team. And then one day they called his name and he got up from our side and went over and got on the stand. So we raised hell about that. But the judge said we were making a mountain out of a molehill. And on another occasion, in the courthouse, the government had given us an office, a room in the courthouse to meet with our lawyers. And in the room there was a closet and it was locked, but there were louvers underneath air vents. And one of the guys, I think it was Pete, looked down and he saw feet in the closet. So he went and got the marshals, and the marshals came and they unlocked the closet and they arrested 2 FBI agents. In the courthouse, in the federal building, in the closet, in the room that they had given us to work with our attorneys. So immediately we raised hell, we went before the judge, and the 2 FBI agents said that that closet had the communications wires for the building, and they were guarding them to make sure that we wouldn't do anything about it. And so then the judge yelled at us for making a mountain out of a molehill, and nothing happened to the agents, and the trial went on. And then after the government put on all of its witnesses, and that lasted about a month, it was time for us to put on a defense. And so there were 6 lawyers, there were 8 defendants. 3 of the defendants represented ourselves, and it was the strategy for the defense. And what the lawyers wanted was, the lawyers said, look, the government have not proved the charges against you, so let's just rest our case because they haven't proven the charges against you. Our jury was sequestered, so that meant that our jury was in hotel rooms. They were not allowed to have any private communications with anyone. So when their husbands or wives or children came to visit, there were FBI agents or marshals in the room to make sure that nobody was talking about anything they weren't supposed to be talking about. Their newspapers were censored, the letters were censored, their phone calls were monitored. The lawyer said, look, these jurors have been locked up for a month. If we put on our defense, that's going to take another month. And then they might be tired of being locked up and away from their families, and they might not fight for you. So if we rest our case now, we might have a better chance. But for the whole year before the trial started, we worked on what our defense was going to be. And we had planned on putting the government on trial for things like Agent Orange, measuring success by body count, free fire zones, all official policy. We had worked really hard to do that. And so there became a difference of opinion between us and the lawyers about what we were going to do. So we had a meeting, and the 8 defendants argued with each other, and then we had a vote. And 6 of the defendants voted to rest the case, and 2 of us voted to put on our defense because we had done all of this work, and we're activists, we're anti-war people, and we finally have a stage where not only the whole country press is going to be there, but there's international press there. We have the stage, we can lay out everything we want to lay out. It doesn't make any sense to me that we would just rest our case. But the other people felt that they were tired of all of this, and they just wanted to be over and to go home. So we rested our case, without putting on a defense, and the jury came back 4 hours later with a not guilty on all the charges. And so that was a strong statement. It wasn't what I wanted, but I was glad that I wasn't going to jail for something that I didn't think I should be going to jail for. But the important part of this story is that the jury got to read the letter that I wrote that was mailed out by the FBI talking about what our tactics would be. And for each tactic, I was very clear, this will be done for defensive purposes only, and we would use the minimum amount of force necessary to protect lives and property. That's what the rule was for riot control in the Marine Corps. So that's what we'll do, minimum amount of force necessary. But in the United States, it's not legal to, if the government or the police are violating your rights, you just have to let them do it and let the court decide. It's not legal to defend your rights right there. But the jury read that letter of us saying the things that we would do to defend our rights, and that included the use of weapons if necessary, and the jury found us not guilty. And that really upset the government, but what the jury was saying is the public has a right to defend itself against the government. And so that was a really, really strong statement. The government really didn't like that. So after the trial, I was tired of going to court. I was tired of being arrested, and I thought, I've had enough of this stuff. I flew out to California, and a friend of mine, David Harris, who was married to Joan Baez, was running for Congress, and he asked me to work on his campaign, so I went out there to work on his campaign. David went to prison for 20 months for refusing to be drafted. He was student body president at Stanford University. He had a deferment, because if you were in college, you had a deferment. But he gave a speech, and he said that deferments were unfair because poor people couldn't afford to go to college, so they would get drafted. And he took his deferment and he burned it. So they drafted him, and he refused to go. But technically speaking, the law said if you were in school, you couldn't be drafted. And just because he burned that piece of paper didn't change the fact that he was a student in school. He was student body president. But they drafted him anyway, and they sent him to prison. And then when he got out, he and I traveled the country talking against the war, and it was the draft dodger and the hero. The point I always made was that I did what was easy. I did what my parents told me to do. I did what the rabbi told me to do. I did what the teachers told me to do. I did what they told me to do. I joined the service. I went and fought for my country. What David did was standing up against the flow. And it took a lot more courage to stand up to all of those institutions and say, you're wrong, and I'm not going to do this. And so I thought, and I still believe today, that it took more courage for what David did than what I did. And so that's what we talked about. And then I decided I was going to get married. I was tired of all the trouble and stuff, so I got married, and I had children, and I really stayed out of politics. And then in 1987, I started getting calls from people I knew in the Marines who were in Central America. And they said, hey, Scott, the stuff that's going on in Central America is just as bad as what's going on, what we did in Vietnam. And we're here helping the guerrillas. And at that time, I was a pilot, and I had a plane. And they said, we want you to bring your plane down and help smuggle supplies to the guerrillas. And I said, well, I'm married, I have children, I'm not going to do any more high-risk stuff. I'm just done with that stuff. And then I got another call, and then I got a third call, and then I started, my survivor guilt started kicking in. Survivor guilt is about how come my friends died but I lived. And there were numerous occasions in Vietnam where I would be one of the few survivors. We had a 19-man patrol. We were sent to an island where there was a supposed 500 escaped Viet Cong prisoners. They sent 19 of us. Twelve of the 19 died. All the rest were wounded except for 3. I was one not wounded. We were going up a trail. They hit us with mines, command detonated mines. That means when you walk by, rather than stepping on it, they press a button. When they set off one of the mines, just by chance, there was a tree next to me. The person in front of me and behind me were killed. So I always wondered, why did I get to live? And I thought that I got to live to work against war. And so I thought that that I was going to work against war. So when I got the third call, I said, okay, I'll go to Central America. But I went on a fact-finding tour to see what was going down. And I went to Nicaragua, to Guatemala, to Honduras, and I came back, and the things that I had seen there just moved me tremendously. So when I was in Vietnam, I was just really a teenager. Now I was a parent and I had children. And so when I was in Central America, when I looked into the eyes of the children, I saw my children. And I thought that, what if I was born here? What if my children lived here? Would it be acceptable to me for my children to have to live under these conditions? And I thought, no, it wouldn't be. And if it wasn't acceptable to me for my children to live under those conditions, why would it be acceptable to me for anybody's children to live under those conditions? And when those conditions were made by American money and American foreign policy, that really made it my business. My money was paying for the suffering of these people. So I decided to work against U.S. policy in Central America, and I got back involved, and I founded the Gainesville chapter of Veterans for Peace because of my decision to work against what was going on in Central America. And the first thing I did was I called all of my old friends up from Vietnam Veterans Against the War and got them on board, and we were cooking again, and we were working against U.S. policy in Central America. And then somebody came to me, and it might have even been here at the Civic Media Center, and they said, hey Scott, you do all of this really good work for peace and justice, but you support Israel. Why is that? And I said, well, I'm Jewish, that's why it is. And they said, well, what about human rights? And I said, well, I'm Jewish. I know lots of Jewish people, and Jewish people wouldn't do the things that you're saying that are happening in Israel. So they said, well, how would you like to go and see for yourself? So growing up, my grandparents, my aunts, my uncles, like everybody dreamed of going to Israel. And so I was getting an opportunity to go. So I said, sure. And I was really excited about it. So I went. I was devastated by what I saw. In a lot of ways, the Palestinians were being treated worse than the way I treated the Vietnamese. Like in Vietnam, we could kill whoever we wanted, but if we didn't kill you, we left you alone. In Israel, the Palestinians didn't have any rights, it was just the things I saw were terrible. And the Palestinians smuggled me into villages that were closed. And on 3 separate occasions, I was captured by Israeli patrols in villages that nobody was authorized to be in. And I had a video camera, and I was videotaping. So, like one day, I'm videotaping houses that were bulldozed down, and the sheet tents that people had to live in once their houses were bulldozed because they weren't allowed to rebuild their houses. And all of a sudden I heard yelling, and I looked this way, and coming out of a street this way, I saw a kid running, and he turned and he was running towards me. And then behind him were 6 soldiers, and they captured him, and they threw him up against the building, a knee to the groin, hitting him in the face, hitting him with their rifles. And then all of a sudden they saw me with a camera. And I was wearing jeans and a green military jacket and a keffiyeh. I had a beard and a ponytail. And they started yelling at me and pointing their guns at me. But they weren't speaking in the language that I understood, so I said, I don't have a clue what you're saying. And I showed my passport, and I'm American. They said, what the fuck are you doing here? I said, I'm a tourist. I'm visiting the Holy Land. And they said, you're not allowed to be here. I said, it's not your say. This isn't your country. You can't tell me that. So I got taken into Jerusalem. I had to see officers. I had to talk to the officers and stuff. And I came back from that trip, and I decided that I was going to work for Palestinian human rights. I could have been born a Palestinian, and if I was, again, my children would have to be living under these conditions, and my tax money is paying for these conditions. So I started working against U.S. policy in Palestine, and my family was very angry at me, and my mother didn't speak to me for 10 years. Because in my family's view, a Jew never criticizes Israel. And that's still a view that we have in a lot of Jewish families today. Any of us could have been born anywhere. We didn't choose to be born here. We could have been born a different race than we are. We could have been born a different sex than we are. You can't hold it against people and punish people for things that aren't their responsibility. And it's not your responsibility what sex you were born, or what race you were born, or what country you were born in. So for me, I don't really have loyalty to America. I don't see myself as an American first. I don't see myself as a man first. I don't see myself as a Jew first. I see myself as a human being first. And that's what I have in connection with all the other human beings. My work is going to be for human beings, and I don't really care about the rest of the stuff. And so that's the kind of work that I do. I really feel lucky to be here in Alachua County. We have such a good county government. We have a good school board. We have a good city commission. I work really hard locally to get good people elected to office. And we're just really lucky to have what we have here. We're a blue county surrounded by red. Alachua County has the strongest wetland protections in the United States of America. We just have really good government. There may be things that you might not agree with, but our county commissioners, our city commissioners, our school board members, you call them up, you can go see them. They'll talk to you. Right now I'm on the Charter Review Commission, and every 10 years the county appoints a Charter Review Commission. And that Charter Review Commission looks at the charter of the county and decides, do we want to add anything to it or take anything away from it and make changes, and those changes will go on the ballot, and the citizens will have an opportunity to chime in on that. I can't talk any more about that, but you should go to the website, go to Alachua County and go to the Charter Review website, and you can see all of the different recommendations. But Doug here, who's Vice President of Veterans for Peace, and he's also on the Sierra Club Executive Committee with me, and he's also on the political committee with me. He's also on the Charter Review Committee. So we're not allowed to, it's out of the sunshine to talk about issues when the two of us are in the same place, so I won't talk about those issues. But you can go and you can see all of the good things that are going on here in Alachua County. And I spend a lot of time trying to get people that I think are good people, that are good citizens, elected to government here, and that's what I do in my spare time. And so I think that's all I'm going to say right now, and then I'm going to open up to questions so I can have dialogue with you. So raise your hands if you have anything you want to say. Go.
Thank you.
Sure.
No, thank you. No,
Oh,
thank you for what you do, for helping everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
So normally when I do my talks, the questions are the main part, but Gary.
Sure, I'll kick it off. I think I'm not alone in being discouraged in the last 18 or 19 years about the either lack of or decline of or invisibility of or especially effectiveness of an anti-war movement. And you and I have talked about this, but I wanted to perhaps get your thoughts for the group, especially in light of the latest news, how they might add another war to the list of wars already going on.
So that's an important question, and I think that the main factor really is whether or not people have skin in the game, if you will. So when I was going to school, there was a draft, and so the citizens knew that maybe their son would be drafted, maybe their father would be drafted, maybe their brother would be drafted, maybe their cousin would be drafted. And because so many citizens worried about their loved ones and their friends being drafted, it made them pay attention to what was going on. Today we have an all-volunteer military, and it's really strange because I've switched sides on this, and originally I fought against the draft because our Constitution says that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist in the United States. The draft is involuntary servitude, so I saw it as unconstitutional. And people said, but Scott, if we have an all-volunteer army, nobody will pay attention to what's going on anymore. The draft is what keeps them involved. And I didn't buy that. And so I wanted to get rid of the draft. Now we don't have a draft, we have an all-volunteer army, and I see they were right. People don't pay attention because they don't have to worry about their kids being drafted and sent to wars that they don't support. And so I think that the main thing really is that they're not at risk. So why should they care? And so that disturbs me, and I definitely would support bringing the draft back, and I would support bringing the draft back for both men and women. Because you now have women serving in combat, and I think if we had a draft with men and women serving, I think you'd see a lot more people saying, hey, what the hell are we doing over there in Yemen, or what the hell are we doing over there bombing all these countries? And so I think that's really the main way that I see that we could do anything. I don't think appealing to Americans about human rights really works. As an American, that's shameful.
What do you think of Tulsi Gabbard's candidacy for the Democrats and her approach to endless wars, so to speak?
So I don't like her at all. And originally, in the beginning, I actually sent her money. But the I just I can't support her. I think the present vote was ridiculous, hearing her talk now, like this is a Bernie shirt. This is a picture of Bernie getting arrested, fighting for things that he believes. I've been arrested fighting for things I believe. Bernie has been consistent for all of these years on the things that he's been fighting for, and I believe in those things. So I'm all in for Bernie, I'm sorry that I ever sent money to Tulsi.
So besides the struggle against the apathy of American people, what have you struggled with when in these many years? What's the biggest struggle you've had in your fight?
So I guess I get discouraged when we can't turn people out. So when I was a student, there were 25,000 students at UF, and we'd have demonstrations, and there'd be 1,000 people, 2,000 people, 3,000 people out there. Today, there's 50,000 students. Now, we've been demonstrating for no war with Iran. And I think about 40 people showed up. The overwhelming majority of them had gray hair, you know. I didn't see all those students. I don't really know what they're thinking about, why they're not involved. I talked a little bit about that, but it bugs me. Like, I think I'm a smart person. I think that I'm logical and reasonable, and I don't have the know-how how to motivate those people to do something. And so that's what's really hard for me. On the other hand, with the Sierra Club, we get really good stuff done. And I'm one of the founders of Stand By Our Plan. So I just want to talk about Stand By Our Plan for a minute. So the largest private landowner in the United States of America is Weyerhaeuser. They're the largest private landowner in the state of Florida. They're the largest private landowner in Alachua County. They own 65,000 acres here in Alachua County. And about 60,000 of those acres are east of Noonan's Lake, and they're wetlands. So Weyerhaeuser wanted to drain the wetlands and build a city there. We formed Stand By Our Plan, and the plan we're talking about is the Alachua County Comprehensive Plan, which has these strong wetland protections, among other things. In our battle with Plum Creek, they spent $10 million in our community, $5,000 to every black church, $5,000 to the boys club, $5,000 to the girls Scouts, to all of these different groups to win community support. With Stand By Our Plan, we raised $30,000 and we spent the $30,000. Again, Plum Creek spent $10 million. And we won that vote before the county commission 3-2, shutting down Plum Creek. Nobody believed that a group of hippies, if you would, could come together and fight a large national corporation that has billions of dollars and beat them. We did that here in Alachua County because we have good people here. So there's a lot of good stuff happening here that we do. The city of Gainesville just renamed a road that we use for Memorial Day weekend, Memorial Mile, and put 2 historical markers up there. Like the work that I do and the peace work, and we're supported by our government. It's just really, really good. So I work for those kind of things, and here locally we have success. I really get my ass kicked when we start working on state representatives or the governor or anything like that, because we're gerrymandered so bad, it's really hard. And I see the things that our state government's doing and our federal government's doing, and I really feel helpless. So rather than feeling helpless, I just kind of focus in on what can I accomplish, and with the city and with the county, I can accomplish things. So that's where my energy goes.
So
wondering, do you get the opportunity to talk to high school students, college students? How do you get your message out to young people who might be thinking about?
So I do speak at schools, and over time it has changed. In the schools today, and I'm speaking about high schools today, there's not the kind of discipline that was in schools when I first started doing this a long time ago. Like a long time ago when I would speak, the kids would pay attention, they wouldn't talk, they would ask questions, they were involved, they would write reaction papers, and they'd ask me questions that they were too shy to ask me in class, and I would respond to those questions, and it was just a great dialogue. I had just tons and tons of papers that I was answering questions to. Today, I don't get any questions, and when I'm talking in the class, you know, kids will get up out of their seat, the group of them will go stand in the corner and start talking and making jokes, not paying any attention at all, disrupting things, and the teachers have no control. So that doesn't make me very happy, and I don't know really how to solve that problem. But for younger kids, I like doing younger kids because when I'm in like an elementary school or a junior high school, I'll say, who wants to be a soldier when they grow up? And all these hands go up in the air. And then I say, who can tell me what a soldier does? And then I'll say, soldiers kill mommies and daddies. Soldiers kill brothers and sisters. Soldiers kill grandfathers and grandmothers. Soldiers kill aunts and uncles and cousins. Who wants to be a soldier? And the hands don't go up. So that's how I address it.
So I was actually going to ask about that too, so I'm glad you did. So even though it's frustrating speaking in high school, you're still, or like college, you know, older students, you're still willing to do it, right? People just need to reach out to you and ask you when you speak for this class.
Sure, like Paul Ortiz at the University of Florida invites me all the time. In his classes, everybody pays attention. Everybody asks good questions. I enjoy, I'll really go and speak to any group that asks me. And I'll speak about war, I'll speak about the environment, about the comprehensive plan, about whatever it is that I have knowledge on that people want to hear about.
So last time you spoke, the Mission Act, a few months ago at the Matheson, the Mission Act had gone through, and I was really upset about it. Now I feel like, oh, it's just kind of the way it is, but that was Trump's acceleration of privatizing the VA. Do you have any comments on that? Is that like just the way it's going to be? Do you think there's any way to reverse that?
So, of course, we're against the privatization of the VA, and it's about 40% privatized now, and it's all about greed. So private medicine is about medicine for profit. The VA is about services, providing services for the veterans. I'm a veteran. I want service. It's not about, shouldn't be about profit. We signed our name on a dotted line and we said we're willing to risk our life for the country. And they promised us that if we did that, we would have services when we came back. And now, what really happens with the privatization is, if you go to a private doctor, they charge a lot more. First of all, I don't pay any money at the VA. You go to a private doctor, they charge a lot of money. You don't pay that money. The VA pays that money, and then it has less money for the VA to take care of people like me that use the VA. So the privatization is undermining my service. And it's all about greed. So in our solstice program, we had Tom Wyszynski, who's the head of the VA. I have a good relationship with him. Veterans for Peace has a good relationship with him. I can go and talk to him about problems at the VA. But is something that's happening at the national level that comes down, and we don't really have the power here at the local level to do much about it. We printed shirts that say, what do our shirts say? I support the VA?
Save our VA.
Oh, Save Our VA. Our shirts say Save Our VA. And so we encourage all of our members to wear those shirts when they go to the VA, and I wear those shirts. Now I've gone to some of the doctors that I know at the VA and tried to give them those shirts. They're afraid to wear those shirts. They're afraid to wear those shirts.
Just to follow up on what you said, as someone who also works at the VA, a lot of those patients who go out into the private sector end up coming back to us because oftentimes the private sector cannot really take care of veterans the way they need to be taken care of.
Well, the VA is so easy. We make a phone call, I got a problem, I get an appointment, I go, my blood is drawn in one room, x-ray in another room, MRI in another room. I don't have to drive all over town like my wife does. When she goes for a checkup, she's got to drive all over town to get those things taken care of. And she has said to me, I wish I could have the VA. And so I love the VA. It's unfortunate what greed does in this country. Doug.
I just wanted to cap off. I've had a really good experience with the VA since I came to Gainesville. It's part of the reason we moved back. And I think I enrolled for healthcare, and about 3 weeks later I had a primary care appointment. One of my nurses who just spoke, who stabs me every 3 months with needles for my migraines, has taken really good care of me. And I just wanted to say, as a veteran, it's really important to have that quality of care. And I have had referrals at other facilities when there just wasn't anything, for some reason wasn't anything available for a month or so, and I've never received the quality of private facilities that I do at the VA.
Give him an extra needle. Sherry.
Could you just, I know you were wounded twice at Vietnam, could you go over what happened to you briefly here when the FBI decided you were a threat to national security?
Okay, so after I was found not guilty in the kidnapping charge, so my first arrest was, I was charged with kidnapping for ransom, and I was charged with kidnapping a 17-year-old black male for $100 ransom, and the proof was the receipt that I wrote for the ransom money. And so there was somebody I knew from high school, somebody in Gainesville owed him $100. He asked me if I could pick up the $100 from this guy. I went and picked up the $100. I wrote the guy a receipt, and I got arrested. Under the law in Florida, there's a speedy trial rule, and if you're arrested for a felony and they don't take you to trial within 180 days and you haven't given them any reason for that, you can have the charges thrown out. So after about 230 days, we filed a speedy motion, a speedy trial motion, and the charges were dropped. And then I was arrested for drugs, and then I was arrested, and I had a jury trial for that, and I was found not guilty. And then I was arrested in the Gainesville 8 case. I had another jury trial, and we were all found not guilty. One of the things I want to say about that was, so we have the trial, and then at the last part of the trial is when the jury comes back in, and the judge asks them if they hand a slip of paper to the clerk. He hands it to the judge looks at it, and the judge says, is this what you all agreed on? And each one of them says yes, then we all stand up and we face the court, and the judge reads the verdicts. So at our table was us and our lawyers. At the other table was the prosecutors and the FBI agents. So we stood up, and each one was not guilty, not guilty, not guilty. At the end, there was no guilties. And then the judge thanked the jury for their service, and told everybody they had to stay in their seats, and told the jury that they could leave. And the jury didn't want to leave. So then the judge said, okay, we're done here, everything's over. And then the jury came over to our table, and everybody had tears in their eyes. Our lawyers, we did, the jurors did, and everybody was hugging. And over at the other table, where the FBI agents and the prosecutors were, they were like this. You know, they just didn't have a clue. So that was really wonderful. So after I got found not guilty in that case, there was through the Freedom of Information Act, I've received a lot of papers. So there was a number of papers calling for my demise, and one of those papers called for my neutralization as a threat to national security. Federal agents came to Gainesville and they shot me. To start with, how that case really came down was one day after I came back from hiding away from all the trials, there was a knock at my door, and I went and answered the door, and there's a pretty lady there. And she was looking for the person who didn't live there. But when I came back into Gainesville, I got a friend of mine to rent a place for me in his name because I wanted to stay kind of anonymous and I didn't want my name. So she came to the house looking for that person. I told her that he doesn't live here, but you could use the phone and call him. I know his phone number and where he lives. So she came in, and we smoked some marijuana, we snorted some cocaine, and we had sex. And I thought, wow, life is great. Then one day she told me that some friends of hers were coming into town, and I met her friends. And then one day I got a call from her friends, and they said, her name was Barbara, and they said, Barbara's coming in town for the weekend, and she wants you to get some coke for her. So I went with her two friends, and I had $100 in my pocket to buy a gram of coke for when Barbara came in town. And I was sitting shotgun, and one of the guys was driving, and the other guy was in the back seat. And all of a sudden, arm came around my neck like this, pulled my head to the headrest, and he stuck a gun in my head. And he said, if you move, I'm going to blow your fucking head off. And then he started beating me with the gun. I'm a Marine sergeant. I'm not a pacifist. I'm going to fight back. I grabbed his wrist. I pinned his wrist with the gun to the headrest. I unlocked the car. I thought they were trying to rip me off for $100, and back then $100 was a lot more than it is today. I unlocked the door to try to jump out into traffic. The driver hit the brakes, grabbed both my hands, pulled my hands back like this. The guy with the gun pulled his hand loose, put the gun to my back, fired. The bullet went in behind my heart, came out my stomach. I survived. I collapsed, the bullet collapsed my lung. It hit my kidney and my liver, and caused some damage, but again, all of that healed up really. I still lost a little bit of use of one lung, but it doesn't really affect me. I was charged with possession and delivery of cocaine and marijuana, resisting arrest with violence, and assaulting federal agents. When I was shot, it was on 2nd Avenue near, 2nd Street near 8th Avenue, and the police station, it was on 10th Avenue, and the police station's on 6th and 8th, so it was really close. So the bullet, I had tennis shoes on that had 7 laces. The impact of the bullet lifted me out of the seat, threw me into the street. I got a gash in my leg from hitting the curb, left my tennis shoes in the car. That's the amount of force from a bullet. The guy that shot me got out of the car, jumped on my chest, put the gun to my face. And just then the Gainesville police pulled up and arrested him. That's when we found out they were federal agents. But at the scene of where this took place, there was a restaurant called Bonnie's Restaurant. It's not there anymore. I think it's a window man now. And people in the restaurant looking out the window, and they saw this car with somebody beating someone with a gun. So they called the police actually before I got shot. So then the police came and the federal agents were there. And the people from the restaurant came out and they wanted to tell what they saw. And so in the trunk of the agent's car were 2 ounces of cocaine. The agents said that they got that cocaine from me. All the witnesses at the scene, and they said that after they shot me, they put the cocaine in the trunk for safekeeping. The witnesses at the scene said that the trunk was never opened. The federal agents yelled at the witnesses. And the federal agents said, we got all the witnesses we need. And the press was saying to the federal agents, what about these witnesses? And the federal agents actually cursed the witnesses. So then I'm in the hospital and I give a statement to the state attorney, and then I have to go to trial. And I don't really understand this part, but the evidence, all the evidence that was presented matched my statement, and none of the evidence matched the statement of the agents. So for instance, on the bags of cocaine, the only fingerprints belonged to the agents. The agents said that they told me I was under arrest, that I grabbed the gun and then I pulled it, and that's how it went off. Well, the bullet came in my back. And the powder burns on my shirt showed that the gun was a place that I couldn't reach. Plus, there were no powder burns on my hand. They tested my hands for residue, and there were no powder burns. On the gun, my fingerprints weren't on the gun either. And the gun actually didn't belong to either of the agents. The gun was a spare gun that they had. It wasn't the gun that was their duty gun. So it was really a throwaway gun where they were going to shoot me and then say that it was my gun. Anyway, with all of that evidence going against their initial statements, they still took me to trial. And so I still went to trial, and of course, all the evidence went to me, and the jury came back, and not only did the jury find me not guilty, this federal jury went to the state attorney's office and recommended that the agents be indicted for attempted murder. Nothing happened. So I went to the grand jury and I said, look, the agents, I had my day in court. I was found not guilty by a jury. The jury recommended that you look at what the agents did. I had my day in court, now it's their turn. And I wanted the grand jury to indict the agents so they would have to go to court for what they did to me. But the grand jury voted not to indict the agents. And then, in violation of the law, several of the grand jurors, and some of them crying, called me up to tell me what happened at the grand jury, which they're not allowed to do. And they said that the prosecutor, and normally in a grand jury, the prosecutor is on the side of the plaintiff and against the defendant. And in this case, they were for the defendants, which were the cops, and they were against me. The federal agents told the grand jury that my house was raided, and in my house they found marijuana. They found a pipe with marijuana residue. They found marijuana roaches in the ashtray. They found rolling papers. They found a little brown bottle with cocaine residue and a little spoon. And they weren't allowed to use those things because they raided my house without a warrant. And so they told the grand jury that I had these things in my house. And if I didn't have these things, they never would have come. And so I got off on a technicality, and they should get off. And so the grand jury let them off. So nothing happened to them. I learned later that my girlfriend knew, I found this out at the trial time, so the plan was to come to Gainesville and to kill Scott Camil. And so she went and told her friends that she was coming to Gainesville and they were going to kill me. And then one of those friends went and told my lawyer. So then we subpoenaed them and had proof that all along the plan was to kill me. So that's what happened with that. And now I'm a little more careful about who's knocking at my door.
Who's the state attorney?
The state attorney, who was the state attorney? So,
Before Cervone?
yeah, it was after Gene Whitworth, and actually I should know it. I can't remember. It was too long ago.
I wondered if it was Cervone.
But I have a really good relationship with Bill Cervone, and he's retiring now.
Wasn't your judge William Sessions?
Yes, the judge was William Sessions.
It would have to be FBI director.
Yes.
Having said all that, what tips or advice do you have to people who are planning on protesting?
So I think that we should never allow the government to intimidate us and make us afraid of exercising our rights. The highest authority in our country is us, the public, okay? The Supreme Court, the Congress, the President, they are our employees. We are the employers. And it is the job of the employers to monitor our employees. And if our employees are doing things that we don't like and we don't say anything, they have the right to think that it's okay. So it's incumbent upon us to manage our employees. It's a dereliction of duty in a democracy. The primary function of citizens in a democracy is to control their government. And if you're not doing that, it's a dereliction of duty. And in our country, we're not controlling our government. And if you don't do anything about it, they have the right to think that it's okay and to continue it. So it's incumbent upon us to let them know we're your employer and we don't like what you're doing. And that's why it's so important to write letters to the editor, to go to demonstrations, to speak out, to do all of those things. The government's not going to police itself. It's our job to maintain control of the government. Otherwise, we're not really a democracy.
Yeah, so earlier today, I actually saw this ad by Bernie Sanders, and he's speaking with Colbert, and he says that in Congress, even though they vote on war and they do these things, they don't know anything about it, or at least not firsthand, right? But they have the powers, right, from my understanding. And so you said that when you have skin in the game, things change, but so many people don't, and within many young people around me, especially males, it's like, if you don't support war, you're not a man, you're weak, angry, whatever. And so how do you think that you can show people about the importance of anti-war and the fact that you're anti-war doesn't mean you're not a man, you're just...
So I'm surprised at that question, and it shows me how I'm out of the loop, because I really thought that the idea of what a man is that we had back in the 60s and 70s, I thought we had evolved from that. And I didn't, I really did. I didn't realize that it's still the same stuff. If you're a man, you can't cry, you can't have feelings, you got to kick ass. I didn't realize that we still had that. So I'm surprised about that. Like, I think it takes more courage to go against the flow than to go with the flow. And so if man has something to do with courage, then those people should be standing up for what they really believe and not cowering. And also the idea of this idea of manhood leaves out half the population. And there are many women that I know that are stronger than many men that I know as far as their politics and the amount of work that they're willing to do. So the whole idea of manhood doesn't even fit in my brain. We should all be empowered. We're all equal. We all have an equal say. I didn't know that idea was still out there, and I don't accept that idea. Any more questions? Well, thank you so much for coming today and listening to me, and thank you for your questions. And now I'm going to go over there. And if you're interested in getting one of these books, come over that table. Half of the money, the books are $20 a piece. $10 from each book goes to the Civic Media Center.